I went to a really old school here in Australia, like the old private schools that look more like Hogwarts than the cookie cutter modern day high schools you see in America. It was archaic to say the least. We had houses just like the ones in Harry Potter, with your own special colored ties, housemasters, prefects, the work. We also had these big old chemistry labs that were really fun to have lessons in once we were old enough to be trusted to handle fairly volatile chemicals. Dropping magnesium into water was one of the most fun times I've ever had. So as you can imagine, I grew to really look forward to our chemistry lessons. So one day we're all congregating outside the chemistry labs. We're inside as it was one of those rare Australian rainy days that people absolutely freak the hell out about. Like it's acid falling from the sky and not just water. I was stood there yapping away with a few friends of mine, when all of a sudden one of them crinkles their nose, sniffing the air. Hey guys, can you smell that? Cue the fart jokes. My friends are being absolutely completely juvenile, laughing and wafting their hands near their noses. I mean, you have to forgive us. We were all literally 13 at the time. If there's ever a time to have a childish sense of humor, it's then. But one of my friends who brought up the smell is like sniffing the air, looking around, insisting he can smell something weird. That's definitely not a fart. After a minute or so, our chemistry teacher enters the building with a sour look on his face because he's just been rained on. He says, excuse me, boys and girls," wadding through the sea of kids until he roughly gets to where our little group was stood. Then he starts making a similar face to the one my friend was making from before. Then all of a sudden, he has a look of absolute horror on his face. He opens the door to the chemistry lab that we were supposed to be using that day. And my God, I will never forget how pale his face was after he shut that door again, super slowly. He then said, "Boys and girls, start filing outside please. Make your way towards the dining hall. Single file please." He was trying to stay as calm as possible, but you could hear the terror in his voice. "But sir, it's raining outside," a girl in our class spoke up, and the look our teacher gave this girl, like he was going to toss her through a window. She didn't say anything after that. We all just walked through the rain towards the dining hall. For those of you who haven't worked it out yet, I'll break it down. Someone went into the labs, somehow got into a locked room, I think through an open window, and turned on all of the gas taps, all of them, to fill up the entire room with flammable gas. All it would have taken is one little spark, and that would have been 100 kids dead. I can remember distinctly knowing something was wrong. I didn't know what exactly it was at the time. Looking back, it absolutely terrifies me to think how close we all were to a horrible, explosive, fiery death. This was back in 1996. At the time, I was in 9th grade. Back then, before Columbine happened, people would talk about shooting up a school and nobody would take it serious. People would just pretty much brush it off and then went on with their day. But I'll never forget this conversation I had with this one boy in my grade. He was the one boy who kept to himself, long reddish brown hair, skinny, wore baggy jeans and a music t-shirt. Everyone always picked on him and edged him on to get into fights with him. It was actually pretty ridiculous now that I think about it and how they treated him. He really didn't have any friends, but for some reason, he picked me to always come around and talk to. I didn't mind. I tried even back then to keep an open mind towards everyone. It was hard being a 15-year-old girl back then in the 90s. Strange times, especially being a freshman. So one day this boy came up to me in the halls of the high school, and he goes to me, "Hey, I really need to tell you something." I tell him, "Okay, sure, let's hear it out." I'm thinking, oh boy, I can only imagine this conversation. His conversations were strange and unusual, not your typical conversations. He proceeds to tell me, "I'm going to shoot up the school one day, you know? And when it happens, I don't want you here. I'll come and tell you the day before it happens, and I want you to stay at home. Don't come to school. I don't want anything to happen to you." I thought to myself, yeah, right. This kid couldn't even fight his way out of a wet paper bag, let alone do something like this. I told him, okay, just let me know. Like I said before, back then you just laugh stuff like that off. About a week later, I noticed he wasn't in school anymore. I then asked the teacher about him, and the teacher told me to mind my own business, I later found out he was suspended from high school and was never allowed back on school property. I wonder if he told someone else the same thing he told me, or just got into another fight with someone, because he was constantly getting bullied and getting into fights with everyone. I kept wondering to this day, what would have happened if he had shot up the school? I always think back to this conversation I had with him to this day, and I think to myself, I hope that if my children had this exact same conversation with someone, they speak up and get that person the help they need. I'm a 27-year-old female and I graduated from high school about 10 years ago. In my freshman year of high school, I was very well known and had a lot of friends. I was always very friendly, and every time I saw someone alone, I would greet them and offer them my friendship. Sometime during the year in my math class, we had a new guy named Jose. Jose had recently moved to the US from Mexico. He hardly knew any English. Me being Hispanic, I was able to speak to him in Spanish and made him feel welcomed. Jose had no friends and always sat by himself. In that math class, I started to help out Jose a lot. He sat behind me and would always play with my hair. I sort of felt like he had a crush on me, but he wasn't too bad looking, so I didn't mind it too much. For a few months, maybe 2 to 3, he played with my hair. It became the norm. He said he really liked my hair. Towards the end of those months, he said he wanted to play a game and asked me to write things I loved the most in life. He would do the same, and we both would share papers. Of course, I wrote down family, God, friends, and a whole bunch of other things. When I gave him back the list, he wanted specific names, and he said he would do the same. I ended up writing my friends and family names. One day we were just hanging out in class, and Jose said, "Can I show you something? But you can't tell anyone else, or else you're gonna have to pay for it." I was so confused. I thought maybe he would ask me out. Jose pulled out a Ziploc bag, and I couldn't really tell what was in the bag. It wasn't until he placed it onto the table that I noticed it was a bag, a Ziploc bag full of my hair. "My hair," he said. Jose then pulled up his sleeve and showed me his arm. He had about 10 knife scars all around his arm, lines made with the blade of the knife that went down his arm. They were fresh knife wounds, and he grabbed my hairs and placed it on top of the freshly opened wound from the night before and said, "You are mine now. I know who you love, what you love. If you don't do as I say, you will pay for everything. These are all of the scars, and these are the souls that I owe you. Anything and everything that happens from now on, think of me." My heart sank. He started smirking. I ran out of the class crying and ran to the office. Everyone was so confused. I asked to speak with my counselor immediately. I explained what had happened. Jose was then pulled out of class, taken to the principal's office, and was expelled that day. I feared for my life. They found all these notes of other people in his backpack. Mine was in there. They saw the scars and found my hair. I never heard from Jose again. I've had some pretty bad stuff happen to me in my life after that. I always thought of Jose. I haven't talked about this in years. I'm afraid that if I mention it, he will hear me and more bad stuff will follow. I got so close with God, closer than ever. Until this day, I don't know if Jose was just messing with me, but I will tell you that after that encounter, I am no longer the super friendly and open-hearted person I once was. In high school, I was in the color guard team and was a bit of a nerd. Every Wednesday we had a late night practice from 4 p.m. until 10 p.m. During one of the first late night practice sessions of the season, in my 4th year, I decided to wait with the underclassmen for their rides. After seeing everyone off and making sure that they were all set, I headed to my car. I have no idea when it started, but I noticed as soon as I got onto the freeway that someone was following me. While on the freeway, I didn't think much of it, even when the other car merged lanes with me. It wasn't until I got off and onto a main road, and the car was still following me, that I began to get nervous. When I pulled into my neighborhood, the other car did too, and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had no idea what to do, but I knew at that point I couldn't go home. My car was rather unique in color. I didn't want to risk a person knowing where I lived, or even what street I lived on. I wanted to call my parents, but I realized that my phone was in my guard bag in the trunk. I felt like I had to think quick, and decided to turn around. I drove around the block, and when the other car realized that I was leaving the neighborhood, it took off. The driver did a 180 and sped away so fast they left skid marks on the road. I parked my car inside the garage of my home that night. The next day, I reported the incident to my school's office and to the local police department. I didn't have much information though. I knew that it was black or a dark blue hatchback, and managed to get the first 2 numbers of the license plate. But that's it. It was too dark to see the make or the model of the car, and I was too flustered to even think of jotting down the number plate. A week and a half later, a notice was sent out about an attempted kidnapping at her sister's school. After a late night of cheerleading practice, a navy blue Toyota Corolla pulled up to a group of 3 girls. A man got out of the back seat and grabbed a sophomore, attempting to physically toss her into the car. She and the other 2 started screaming, and the man jumped back in the car and took off. They managed to get most of the license plate numbers, though not all of them, and the first 2 matched the first 2 of my one, of the car that followed me. The man and the driver were never caught though. Thankfully, as far as I know, there were no other kidnapping attempts or kidnappings in her area. I have no idea who they are. I have no idea what their intentions were. I just hope that I never meet them again.